Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Once again, this is Morgan from RacerX Performance Tuning, and I'm here with my good buddy Jeremy from Remy's Rides.
Hey Morgan.
Hey Jeremy. So today we're working on this 2010 Evo X SST transmission, and you can tell us a few things that you've done with the car so far.
So we got it in here the other day and we were getting ready to put the wideband O2 in it and noticed that he had a couple of exhaust leaks. So we had to send it back out and get some exhaust repaired. Because there was a crack in the manifold and a crushed exhaust pipe, and neither of which are conducive to anything we're trying to do. So we got those repaired and brought it back in.
Okay.
Since we've added a high flow fuel pump,
AEM,
AEM in the stock location. It was really nice. I won't say easy to do because it's a lot to take apart, but it fit in really well. We also added a 3-port boost controller, which gives you, which gives you a whole lot better and smoother control over your boost. Yes, more boost control means more better. We also put in an AEM wideband gauge in a really cool looking 3D pod that somebody printed that fits in a vent. So kind of out of the way. It's still nice looking. So we're kind of all cleaned up and put back together. And Morgan, what are you doing next?
All right, so now Jeremy's got the ball rolling. I'm going to pick up the baton and start getting down to the tuning. With the AEM AFR gauge in there now, I'll be able to wire that up so that we can now start to read the AFR data into EvoScan, which is going to be a very important part of our tuning. Then we're going to put an initial calibration on the car, just kind of get it running, validate that everything is working within specifications. Once we're done with that, Jeremy's going to drop in the Injector Dynamics 1000cc injectors. It's about twice as big as the stock injectors. We're going to go back, remap all the fuel tables, get this car starting, idling, cruising. All of that within the fuel tables. We're going to manage all of that for today. Additionally, we're going to work on this MyVEX, so we're going to start to see more torque down low and improve response from the throttle. And then finally, we're going to do something that's very important for these SST transmissions. We're going to do the SST Teach-In, which should be done periodically. I'm not sure about the service interval exactly, but anytime you tune the car, you should definitely redo the Teach-In for the SST. So a lot of things going to happen for this Evo 10 today. It's time for us to get down to business.
All right, thanks, Morgan.
Yeah.
So now it was time to get to work. Remy got the injectors and the Grimspeed 3-port solenoid installed. Then I got to play with wires and get the whole serial, the USB wideband output thingy connected and reading properly into EvoScan. So it was time to drop an initial calibration and get the car on the road for some data logging. One of the interesting things about the Evo 10 is that it uses both math and speed density based values in its load calculations. Kind of a best of both worlds approach. I decided to stay consistent with that for the closed loop portion of things, but I modified the math scaling tables above, say, 2.5 volts so that the car would run in speed density mode only during boost. We got the initial load registration in line, and then we went to work on the fuel tuning.
Right, and now we're idling under our latest calibration 005. Wideband is looking good. Short-term fuel trims are looking good. Alright, pretty pleased with that. Okay, and so after a few revisions on the fuel maps, we have things pretty much dialed in for the closed loop portion of things and a little bit of part throttle. So we're looking at this right here. This is our short-term fuel trims. Everything is definitely within the plus minus 5%. Many things are very, very close. And then we come over to look at our AFR. AFR is pretty much on point where we would like it to be, in that 14-15 range, and then the AFR error is also very minimal, less than
less than 1% in most places and less than 3% overall. So pretty good results so far with the fuel tuning. So on to the next step. Now we're going to work on the pass-through can Teach-In to update the SST. This is something that should be performed, I forget the service interval exactly, but it should also be performed every time you tune the car. So a lot of shops will charge $80, $100, $200 for this, but at RacerX Performance Tuning, when you're tuning your Evo X with us, it is included as part of the package at no additional cost. Being a true dual clutch transmission, the MRs equipped with this sports shift transmission do require proper maintenance and use. It is recommended to follow the Japanese service intervals rather than those printed in other markets. Driving the car in S Sport mode is the way to go, not only for the most fun, but also for the life of the clutch packs. Performing this SST Teach-In allows for the transmission to be recalibrated according to the Mitsubishi specs. And now it's time for boost Teach-In. With the exhaust issues resolved, performance parts installed, and the initial calibration complete, we booked some time at Countersteer to finish the rest of the tuning on the Dyno. Hello everybody, once again this is Morgan, RacerX Performance Tuning. Today we're at Countersteer. We have brought with us a 2010 Evo 10 MR, and we are just getting started. Got things strapped down the dyno, made our first pull, and we're going to be working on boost tuning today, getting the boost, wide open throttle fuel, timing, and try to put a wrap on this car for this stage. So time to get down to work. Here we go. Alright, so we're working on the wastegate duty cycle, trying to get this car up and into a good boost range. About to go make another pull, and we'll see what we get. Okay, so one of the things that we feared has happened, which is the weld that was put into the exhaust manifold has formed another crack. I don't know if you can see that here, but we'll try to bring it in on there. There's a crack on the right side all the way down there. Okay, so the exhaust manifold came back to bite us. This is one of the weak links in the Evo 10s, and a lot of owners report getting these cracks over time. Replacement with an aftermarket manifold is a better option than attempting to weld it, as you can see. As it were, this crack was sucking away all of our power, and that was reflected in the dyno results. With torque at a maximum of 300 foot-pounds and horsepower peak of only 284, we were far below our anticipated results, which we thought would be in the mid-300s on both. We ended up calling it a day and let the owner, to go and source and replace the manifold before we could get back to the tuning. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about tuner safety when tuning an Evo X MR. So while we're doing the wide open throttle pulls, we get to take a moment between the pulls to evaluate a number of things and kind of see what's going on with the car. First thing we want to do is we'll just kind of isolate the pull itself. So we'll grab a TPS so we know the throttle position was maxed out, and then let's grab the RPM, which gives us a chance to kind of see the RPM range as we were doing this fourth gear pull on the Evo here. So as always, the first course of action is really to evaluate knock. Nothing is more important than knock evaluation when we're doing these pulls. Everything else really becomes a moot point if we're finding out that we're getting huge discrepancies in knock counts and so forth. So we're going to pull knock sum, and the first thing we're looking for, of course, is to see if we've got any counts that are, counts of 3 or higher are the ones we're going to be concerned about. Here we have a count of 1, it's negligible. Another count of 1 is negligible as we're kind of working our way through the RPM range. Once we get down here, we do see a count of 3 at about 6,000. So we're getting near about red line, almost 7,000 RPM. And another count of 5 here. So these are ones that we're going to be looking at and trying to evaluate what's going on, whether or not we want to reduce some timing here or otherwise. A couple of the values that we'll look at when we're doing this bit of knock evaluation is the knock base and the knock change. Now, I think in this calibration we didn't actually in this log, we didn't actually record the knock change and the knock base, but had we, I can see this is 0 here. But the knock base is essentially like your knock floor, and what we're looking at the difference between the knock base and the knock change. That is to say, if the knock change exceeds the knock base or our floor, and again, we didn't record these here, then we will evaluate that against any knock sum that we saw. If that knock change exceeded the knock base, then we can be pretty well assured that we did experience a significant knock count during that time. And typically what we'll do during this time is we'll start to look and see what else was going on, how much boost were we running, and how much timing did we have during the course of this knock event. So we'll look at the boost, and we'll look at timing advance here. So we can see that as we were in the upper 6,000s, almost 7,000, we were holding about 20 pounds of boost, and our timing was about 15 degrees of advanced timing there. And then for our 5 count of knock, we know that we were at about 16 degrees of timing. I think I saw once here 17 degrees of timing. So that's something we can go back and evaluate. Maybe we're going to reduce the timing in this area and see if that impacts us. There could be some other factors involved here, but that's probably our first operation there, is just to reduce the timing there and see if this knock goes away at that point. Bearing in mind that the general rule of thumb is that what the ECU is going to do is if it receives 3 counts of knock or higher, for every 3 knock count that it receives, it's going to reduce timing by 1 degree. That's the ECU's way of Mitsubishi put in there of trying to protect the engine. And our job as tuners is to try to prevent this from happening. We do not want to rely on the ECU to do the reduction for us if we can do that proactively in advance. That's why we're going to manage timing here and go back and evaluate. And again, the objective here is to make sure that we don't exceed that 3 count of knock sum with all that we can do to manage that. The next area that we want to try to look at, especially with the MRs, is how we're managing these clutch packs. So remember, this is an automatic car with the dual clutch, and these clutch packs, especially if they're stock clutch packs, these are things that we are going to have to stay within a certain bit of parameters for in order to keep those clutch packs intact. There's aftermarket clutch packs which can handle a lot more torque and so forth, but most people have the stock clutch packs, and with that, we're going to make sure that we don't want to exceed 350 foot-pounds of torque, and that's pretty much the upper limit right there. So that is a limitation you have to keep in mind as a tuner when you're working with these cars. What else we're looking at? We're looking at clutch pressure. So let's go grab that on the Megalog viewer here. So we are doing 4th gear pull, and our clutch pressure, we'll pull it up here. It's on the even side. Clutch pressure even right here. All right, so clutch pressure is an area where we want the clutch pressure to stay somewhere between, let's say, 150 and 180. That's a good safe zone to be in. If we find ourselves getting above 200, then we're actually starting to put the seals at risk here. So as we look through this pull, and we know before, let's actually pull up our boost again so we can kind of see where we were at in terms of how many pounds of boost pressures. We had about 25 pounds of boost pressure here. At our highest level of boost pressure, our clutch pressure on the even was 162. So that's great news. Right there we can see we were right in that sweet spot as we talked about, not getting too high. We can see that's actually our highest point. So everywhere else as we move throughout the rest of this pull, is again nicely staying in that sweet spot that we talked about, somewhere in, in that 150, 180, or even down here we're below that that area. So all of that is good news right there. So we know that we were taking care of the clutch packs in regards to clutch pressure. The other area we want to keep a close eye on is the clutch slip. So let's go over to clutch slip speed even, since again this was a 4th gear pull. There it is, clutch speed even. And in this area, what we're looking for is to try to stay within that plus or minus 5%. Again, looking at our highest level of boost pressure at 4,600 RPM. That was probably the area where we created our highest amount of torque during the pull. And we can see our clutch slip speed here was just a value of 2. As we look through it, we see minus 3, 2.5, 0.5, minus 2, 2, 3. All of this is very good news. It looks like our clutch slip speed and our clutch pressure were both well within the range of what we'd expect them to be throughout the course of this pull. So that's good news. The clutch packs were definitely being taken care of, and there were no issues with that during the pull. Let's see, another area that I like to look at, let's kind of clean up our Megalog viewer here for a moment. Whoops, we don't want that right now. Is intake air temperature and manifold air temperature. So let's go and grab these two here. Essentially what we're looking at here, between our intake air temperature and our manifold air temperature, it's kind of a way of evaluating how well our intercooler system is working, right? So obviously, let's see, manifold air temperature, there it is. So generally what we're going to try to do is, or hope for, is that we're going to stay within, let's say, maybe 10 degrees of the intake air temperature by the time we got to the manifold air temperature. So here, early in the pull, we're at almost 4,000 RPM, and our intake air temperature is 93, and the manifold air temperature is 104. So about 11 degrees difference there. I'm just going to kind of scroll through here. Again, it's 93 and 102. 93 and 102, it's kind of staying right there, 95 and 104. As we're getting out toward the upper M here, 95 and 105. So all of this looks pretty good. We're staying pretty much now here at the end of the run, starting to get a little bit hotter as we're getting to the almost 7,000 RPM range. So we're starting to see the discrepancy get a little bit bigger here. But overall, for the most part, throughout most of the pull, we're staying within 10 degrees. So it means our intercooler system is working pretty good. Now, mind you, this pull was taking place on a dyno, so all we really have is some giant fans blowing air at the car. And in the real world conditions, you actually have a lot more air coming through the intercooler as you're driving the car than we would have in a dyno. So with this information, we're seeing this coming off the dyno. Makes me feel pretty good about the intercooler working for this car. So next, one of the areas obviously that we want to evaluate during the course of each wide open throttle pull is how's our fuel doing, right? So we're going to take a look at what our AFR target was, this is the map, and what our actual AFR was, coming from the gauge. Do a little bit of comparison between these things. We know that we were targeting generally about 11.0 AFR as we're getting through the course of this pull. So we can quickly see here, just by looking at the two of these, one compared to the other, how well we were doing. So here down in the, let's go down even further here. Let's go down to the beginning of the pull. We were running an AFR of 11.9, and our AFR map was 11.8, so pretty much well close to each other there. Not really much of a problem there. We can follow the graph here. We're going to start to see that as we get further into this pull, our AFR was getting richer than our map. So we can kind of see sort of graphically here what was going on and how we were getting richer. If I'm going to be in some form of error, I'd rather be on the error of being richer than being leaner, and we certainly can lean things out here. So as we're walking through the map here, 11.4 and 11.4, things were good right up until about the point where we got to be at about 5,000 RPMs, and at this point in time, our AFRs were 11, the map was 11.4, and we started getting richer and richer from there. So 10.4 on an 11.2, 10.2, almost a full point richer than we want to be. Another variable that we have, or a factor we can add in here, is the Evo X AFR error. Essentially, this value, we want to see this as close to 0 as possible. So we're back here where we were looking pretty good. 11.5 on 11.4, we see our AFR error was 0.8. So everything's good there. And as we got further along into the pull, we can see our AFR error rate telling us we're at least 8% too rich, right? 8% too rich there, 8% too rich here, 7%. So you kind of get an idea as we're getting across the pull. Things got a little bit better here and maybe a little bit better here. So really we have an area right in this area here is our area where we really need to kind of go back in and refine our fueling a little bit. We can look at this another way. We go grab a histogram, pull up the RPMs and versus the engine load, and again here it looks like I already had it set up, but we drop in our Evo X AFR error. You can see that right here in this area between 240 load and maybe 300 load from 5,000 RPM, and generally up to about 7,500 RPM, so almost at the red line. We can see on an average we were about, looks like maybe 7% too rich. So we can go back in to the fuel tables for the VE table and modify this area, kind of lean this out a little bit, go back and do another pull, and look. We can see right here, this is basically the course of the dyno pull right here, and right here we were pretty good as we noticed, very little AFR error at all. This area here you can kind of disregard because this is probably we were in D-cell fuel cut. So really we're just kind of looking right here, maybe a little bit rich right here. So overall, generally pretty good here in the middle of it, and pretty rich here in the late middle of it, and then pretty good again at the end. Very well. So then there's maybe just a couple other areas we want to look at. Let's go back over to the log view. And here, one of the things we like to look at is the load registration. So what we're going to do is go clean up some of these guys here. Let's take the AFR error out. And let's take out the AFR information. So we kind of looked at that. We don't have to clutter up our screen too much. So one of the things I'll grab is, let's grab some of our math information. Right. So one of the things I'm going to get is actually the math hertz themselves, or the math volts. That's important for me, and I'll explain why in a moment. We have the math volts, we have math calc, and map calcs. So let's go grab both of those. We'll go to math calcs. Here they are, math calcs and map calcs, and we'll look at our chosen calc here in just a moment. And we'll talk about why that would be important. So let's get the map calcs here. There they are. All right, and then the chosen calc. So, as we talked about earlier, the way that the Evo is set up by Mitsubishi is that it's a combination of both a math-based and a speed density volumetric efficiency-based system. And so the ECU makes a determination between, let's get the chosen count, between whether it's going to use the math values or the map values to determine what to do in terms of load. So generally, you spend a lot of time working on trying to get your load registration correct, at least especially as you are under boost, so that your map calcs and your math calcs are essentially as close to each other as possible. The discrepancy between the two of them is as little as possible. So this way, you kind of have this nice lack of, let's say, oscillation between the two as it's trying to do its thing as you're going into driving, whether in vacuum or in boost. Now, for me, I prefer just to run, from a speed density perspective when we are under load. Okay, so when we're in boost. So for me, I went in and changed the math scaling. I'll just drag this over here. Math scaling tables from anywhere from, let's say, once we get to about 2.5 volts of math volts, start jacking these numbers up toward the 65,000 maximum. What this is going to do is anywhere above this area, essentially, the ECU is going to look and compare the math calcs and the map calcs, and regardless of whatever is, what it does is it chooses the lower of these two values, and that's what it's going to work with. So by changing the scaling in this fashion, we're going to essentially force it to always choose the map calcs anywhere we're above 2.5 hertz. So let's see, as we look over here into the chart, we're at, let's go back here, as we're at the beginning of the poll, we're only at 2.8 math volts. And we can see the math calcs was 189, the map calcs was 107, so it chose the map calcs of 107. But regardless, it's always going to now start to make these, make the chosen calculation be the map calcs, regardless of whatever the math calcs may be. So under normal circumstances, if those tables were under their normal values, we would be choosing math calcs in this situation instead of map calcs. And so we'll be kind of going back and forth between these two. I don't want to do that when I'm doing wide open throttle pulls. Once I'm in boost, I just want it to be one table, and I'll manage that table, that methodology, which in this case is speed density. So if you look across the course of most of this, the rest of the way, regardless of whatever math calcs were, it's always choosing my chosen calc as my map calcs. So I like to do it that way. It makes things a little bit more simplistic for me, and I think it's better for the tuning of the car under wide open throttle. All right, and then finally, what we came here to really do, we're in the process of doing boost tuning, and we haven't yet taken a look at how our boost tuning is going. So we're looking at all those things for safety and engine temperature, all the things we want to kind of check and make sure are pretty good, especially the knock. But then we had time to finally go in and evaluate. Let's see what was actually happening with our boost tuning. So we'll go in here and we'll grab the load. Let's look at load, and we'll look at boost. And then let's go ahead and get load. Let's go get boost. These two kind of go hand in hand with each other. Talking about boost in the PSI, we can kind of see these two lines are pretty much on top of each other as we would expect them to be. Let's go back here in the poll, maybe up to this area. We'll start right here. So we'll look at those two things. And then let's open up another graph, and we're going to look at our wastegate duty cycle, essentially the active wastegate duty cycle. And then let's look at our wastegate duty cycle correction. So what we're saying here is, right here in the middle of the, let's go back a little bit. Let's go back a little bit earlier. So at about 4,200 RPM, we were running about 21 pounds of boost with a wastegate duty cycle of 75%, maybe 76% wastegate duty cycle, and there was no correction. Right? So essentially we were saying at this point in time, everything was pretty much where it was supposed to be, or the ECU was not making any corrections. We're saying that 75% wastegate duty cycle that we had added or into the table was correct to achieve this 20 pounds of boost at this RPM, at this throttle position, all things being well there. Now, as we start to move up, our goal here really, and we'll grab one of the several tables that talk about what our boost targets were. So our boost targets essentially were, once we're looking at above, basically wide open throttle down here, as we get into mid to upper RPMs, we're saying we really were targeting 24 pounds of boost. That was our goal, to be at 24 pounds of boost and see how well we would do. With that 24 pounds of boost, let's grab one of the wastegate duty cycle reactive tables. In here, earlier, maybe we might be running 70% duty cycle, and then later we thought we'd need 80% duty cycle, and eventually 83% duty cycle to kind of get ourselves to this 24 pounds. So this is after several rounds of doing this evaluation, modification of these tables to get closer and closer. So that's why we're starting to see our wastegate duty cycle corrective factor being less and less at this point. So let's go back over and see how the rest of this turned out. So here we're at 25 pounds of boost, a little bit higher than our target, running that 80% wastegate duty cycle. This pretty much came off of our table right in the right area we were talking about here, that 80%, and there was no correction. But as we start to get a little bit here, when the ECU picked up on the fact that we were over boosting and started pulling out a little bit of duty cycle. This is exactly how it's supposed to work. So now we're down to about 79.5. All that's very well and good. If your wastegate duty cycle correction is anywhere in that plus minus 3, plus minus even 5% range, I think you're doing pretty good. There's not really much to worry about there. It's sort of a little bit of a closed loop area. Nobody's ever going to be perfect in terms of setting their wastegate duty cycle exactly for every target at every RPM at every throttle position. So you have that closed loop factor to help us out here. So that's pretty good. Again, as we're moving across the rest of the poll, you can see now we're commanding 80% wastegate duty cycle. It's pulling out another 2%. It got us down to the 80 there. So I think our boost wastegate duty cycle setting was for 83 there. Here we're not taking anything out. We're at 21 pounds of boost though. Now I know we were targeting 24, so pretty soon here, as our boost is kind of leveling out here, 21.5. We're trying to hold 24, and we also know that it's not possible to hold 24 pounds of boost across this RPM range. Now we're up at about 6,500 RPM on these stock turbos. It's just not going to happen. There's not enough in that turbo to hold it. Now you can see our wastegate duty cycle correction's gone up 3.5% to get us to 87.5%, and we're still only getting to almost 21 pounds of boost here. And it's going to continue to add more and more, 5 more degrees, 87.5. It's basically telling us here's 91. Essentially it's telling us, dude, you need to run basically all the wastegate duty cycle you have, and I'll do my best to try to keep you up at that boost rate. So here's a 7% correction, running 93%. You really, once you're over 90% wastegate duty cycle, there's nothing left. There isn't anything else. Adding above that's really not going to make any difference at all. Pretty much near the end of the rev range here, and again, this is kind of very, very common for these stock ECUs to start running out of boost at this point in time, and we got getting all of it out of it that we can. So this is all pretty good here. Pretty satisfied with this. There's a little bit we could tweak to it, but not much that I would say. So So that's the process. We just go through this each and every run, evaluate all of these fields, make the corrections, and then upload the new calibration, go back and do it again. And each time we're going to get closer and closer to our goals, to the point where we reach the goals, and then we can call it an end of the day and say that this car has been tuned. Thank you all for watching. Really appreciate your time today. Hey guys, I wanted to take a quick moment just to point out something I think is very important. As you may or may not have heard, that Evo that we were working on the dyno was actually stolen a few days after that. Literally stolen right out of the owner's driveway overnight. Now, we got lucky. This one was recovered, and in fact, it was very little to no damage on it. So we got really lucky this time around. But it underscores the fact, look, we spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and then again, a lot more money installing parts and tuning and everything else to make our cars, well, our cars. And you really just don't want to leave that open for theft, okay? So get whatever anti-theft devices that you can and put them on your vehicle. Again, it's our investment, it's our lifestyle, it's our joy. One of the ones I'd recommend is this Optimus. It's a nice GPS tracker. You can go to optimustracker.com, and basically this tracker will track anything really wherever you put it. I love it because it's got nice mobile features. You can run the app on your phone, and pretty much as soon as this this device is moved, like the wind blows, and it will get a notification on your phone, text message, email, whatever you have decided that you want to be notified that your vehicle is in movement and whether or not you plan it to be. You can create a geo fence to say my vehicle can be in this area, and that's fine. If it exceeds this area, then that's not good, and I'll get a notification about that. It comes in a small package like this. Battery life lasts at least 2 weeks. Not bad, right? 29 bucks. Maybe $30, you can probably get it for less. There's an optional magnetic case that you can hook it up underneath your car if you don't want to hide it somewhere within your car, however you may want to choose. There is a monthly fee, of course, so it's going to be about 20 bucks, I think, a month to get the tracking notification every month, but it might be well worth it, guys. Again, protect your cars. Definitely consider something like this or something similar to keep an eye on your car. All right, guys, that's it. We're going to wrap up the video at this point. I want to wish you guys a great week. Thanks for taking the time to watch this with us. And we'll get back to this Evo as soon as we can and see what we can bring that horsepower up to next. Take care. Have a great day, guys.